our clandestine covert disappearances are small, individual, and very in remote locations. And unless we get information from the perpetrators involved, we won't be able to find those people. So those are two kinds of cases, the kind of public ones and then the covert clandestine ones that we work on.
So just on that, you say that a lot in that one category, these are only known to a small number of perpetrators. How do you do you have to work with them then to sort of figure out what happened to people? And can you say more about how forthcoming they are then to help you find people?
Okay, well, this particular picture you're showing right now, this was one of the clandestine covert deaths. This was on a farm in Zeerust, a private farm, and there was an amnesty application. It involved the killing of an Askari at Vlakplaas in 1989. His name was Pamelo Ntelang. And I think he was a little bit of a reluctant Askari. He seemed to drink heavily.
Just for people who are outside South Africa, an Askari is a former ANC or PAC activist who was turned by the security forces to then work for them.
Yeah. Thanks for that. And anyway, he lost his firearm, and I think it was the second time he'd lost his firearm, and he was assaulted at Vlakplaas, and then he was tubed with the inner tire, the rubber inner tire, and he suffocated to death. And then his body, he was wrapped up in a blanket, and Eugene de Kock and some of the other Vlakplaas officials then drove him out in a vehicle to this private farm in Vlakplaas. One of them, Martin Serras, had grown up on the farm next door, so he knew the site. And they buried him in that hole that you saw there next to a river. And so when de Kock was in prison, we requested his assistance, and he prevailed upon Martin Serras to take us to the site. And even with that cooperation, we still had to dig for 2 weeks to locate that grave, and we found Pamelo's remains still wrapped in this green blanket from Vlakplaas, and that was the example of getting assistance. I mean, we would never in a million years have located that particular spot on a private grave 300 kilometers from where he'd originally been killed in Pretoria. So, you know, that's what I mean. We wouldn't find it without some kind of assistance or some kind of information from the perpetrators. And even when they do give information, it was still a struggle to locate the grave. We had to use a machine and dig up a field, basically. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, and put this a more sort of political question from you. I understand that there have been, so of course the tens of thousands of people died in political violence, like we mentioned, proxy wars, violence on trains. But if we're talking about political assassinations, I'm assuming there are tens of thousands of them that must have happened between 1960 and 1994. And as I understand it, of course, we had the TRC, that I think you can count on one hand the number of people that actually are in jail for those assassinations. Of course, people get the satisfaction now or satisfaction is not the right word, but they can have closure because their relative was found, reburied in with some rights, and so people can feel connected to them in some way. But how do you feel about this process that like very few of these killers, if you want, actually paid for this in the end? Or is this just something that we must accept? And I think this kind of relates to our earlier discussion around 11 September about wanting some kind of justice. That it's infuriating at some level, but is this just also kind of a consequence of like what happens after you've had this, the violence that you had in South Africa, that this might be the best terms in which you can move on? I mean, what do you say to that?
Yeah, that's Our team doesn't really deal with the issue of prosecutions. We deal with the recovery of remains. And I must say, I think of the cases that we've worked on, probably maybe 3 or 4 had the possibility of prosecutions. The skirmish kinds of cases that we dealt with, where there was kind of shootouts with the security police, probably would never have yielded prosecutions.